Hello and welcome to the daily newspaper analysis. Today we shall be discussing the newspaper of the 26th of February. So coming to the first article. Now basically these are two articles. This article is on the editorial page, whereas this article is on the business page. But in this article is also very important, and the entire context of both these articles is the same. That is with regards to the crisis in the Indian banking sector. So I shall be clubbing them and discussing them together. Now, coming to this crisis in the Indian banking sector, definitely it cannot be denied that this crisis is a reality. This is largely something that can be divided into three aspects. The first is the NPA issue, the rising non-performing assets in the banks. The second issue is with rising scams in the banking sectors that have come to the light. Another analysis is with regards to the privatization of these banks. There are questions being raised that these public sector banks should now be privatized. So it is these three general headings under which we shall be discussing this entire crisis in the Indian banking sector. So coming to the analysis, the first issue, as I said, was the NPA issue. Now, first and foremost, you need to understand what is a non-performing asset. Now, a non-performing asset is simply a loan which the bank had given sometime in the past, and now the bank is not expecting this loan to be repaid. So when such a scenario exists, it is known as an NPA. Now, what is the criteria for assigning a loan as an NPA? The criteria is that if a loan, if the loan's interest, or for that matter its principal repayment, is overdue for more than 90 days. So this is something that you need to know. The time limit is important. This can be asked in PT also. So if the loan is overdue for more than 90 days, then it is going to be called as a non-performing asset. So this is one aspect which you need to understand. Also, some history in this regard is something that you should have an idea about. Now, what happened in the aftermath of the 2008 global crisis was that globally it was accepted that all countries are going to infuse more money into the economy so that the economy can be revived and the ill effects of this particular crisis can be done away with. So this was something that even India followed. And as a result of this particular liquidation in the economy, the NPA issue has emerged. Now, some figures are what are important, that you should know that up till the year 2011, largely the NPAs were well under 1 lakh crore rupees. So this is one figure. However, it was after 2011 that the NPAs began to rise. In the year 2012, for instance, it suddenly rose to 1.4 lakh crore. But even till this point of time, nobody was paying much attention to it. It was largely being ignored. However, till now, in the year 2017, this has shown a 6-time increase and it has become equivalent to 7.9 lakh crore, and this is a huge sum. It almost accounts to 10.2% of the total loans that the banks have given. So this is some important figure. This is the current scenario. Also, it is expected that this is going to touch the 10 lakh limit, 10 lakh crore mark by the year 2018. So indeed, you can analyze that the problem is a severe one. It is a grave issue. So that is something that we need to understand. This is what is relevant from the background aspect. Another thing which we need to understand is with regards to the public versus private banks. Now, it can be said that the problem of NPA is common to both public as well as private banks. But the issue is that it is more pertinent or more festering in the public banks, because out of this 7.9 lakh crore, approximately 6.9 lakh crore is what is the NPA of the public sector banks compared to the private sector banks. So that is one analysis. That is it that the private sector banks have fared well? That can be one analysis. And questions on the functioning of the public sector banks. Another question can be raised that the public sector banks being under the government, is there a foul play by the government itself? So all of these questions are going to be rising in this context, in this backdrop. So that is something that becomes important for us. Another thing is with regards to the impacts of this rising NPAs on the profits of the banks. Now here you need to understand that there are some RBI guidelines, and as per these RBI rules, a part of the profit has to be kept aside to compensate for the NPAs. Now, if NPAs are going to continuously rise, then these profits have to be kept aside for curbing the NPAs, and as a result of which there is a sharp fall in the profits of the banks. They have nearly halved of what they were in the year 2012. So this is something that is important for us. Now, what happens is that if the profits of the bank are going to decrease, then this is going to impact the investments that these banks are going to make. They are going to impact their operations. This is first and foremost going to reduce the credit giving abilities of the banks, and this ability is going to impact the investments. Also, the investments by the bank themselves. For example, a bank wanted to open 10 more branches or for that matter, go into the rural areas. Now, this is something that is not going to happen. So the idea of financial inclusion, which the government has been imagining for long or wanting for long, that is something that is going to get hampered. So that is one impact of this particular issue of NPA. Also, this is going to have adverse impacts on the job creation by the banks. You need to know that banks are one such sector which is creating white collar jobs. A large number of jobs are what are being created in the banking sector. Now, if banks are going to face severe losses, then this tendency of the banks is also going to get impacted. So this has a cascading impact on the economy. So that is something that you need to understand with regards to this issue of NPA. The other issue is with regards to the Basel III norms. Now, first and foremost, you need to understand what is this Basel. Now, this Basel is actually the name of a place. It is here that the Bank for International Settlements is located. This is something that is important. The Secretariat for the Bank of International Settlements is located in Basel, and this is a place in Switzerland. Now, this is something that was formed by a Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, and this committee was formed in the year 1975. And after this, it is this Bank for International Settlements came into existence. Now, this is known as the banks of the central banks. What it actually does is that it studies the banking sector across the world, across several countries, and then it gives certain norms. So as per these norms, it is some regulations, some checks which the banks should maintain to ensure bank health. So that is what this does. Now, as per the Basel III norms, what has been advocated is that a capital adequacy ratio of 9% is what the banks should maintain. Now, what do we understand by this capital to risk assets ratio or the capital adequacy ratio? This means that what amount of capital should the bank have to give a particular loan. For example, if it is 9%, then this means that 9 upon 100. This means that if a bank has to give a loan of 100 rupees, then the bank should have with itself a 9% on rupees 9 is what the bank should have with itself to give a loan of rupees 100. So this is something that is important. It ensures that some degree of capital is there with the bank to meet a situation of losses. Now, this ratio or this percentage is something that has been raised under the Basel III norms to 9%. So this is again becoming challenging for India because already our banks are facing an issue of non-performing assets, and as a result of which this adequate capital requirements which have been advocated by the Basel III norms is becoming difficult for the banks to maintain. Now, at present, all the banks have this capital adequacy ratio maintained, so that is a good sign. But the problem is that if these problems of NPA continues to rise, then definitely it is going to impact the Basel III norms. So this is one understanding which is important. Another thing is with regards to an issue of transparency. Now, this is one of the most important issues with regards to NPAs. Transparency is a specific topic for us under General Studies Paper 2. So that is where it is going to become important. Now, here you need to understand that the RBI releases a financial stability report annually. But the problem is that for long, the financial stability report of the RBI has overlooked this problem of the NPAs. Now, why was this overlooked is because the banks were not showing transparency in their records. These NPAs were called as restructured loans. What happened is that the loans which were defaulting, the companies which were defaulting on the loans, the banks were giving them additional capital. They were in fact infusing them with more loans on the grounds that if the company revives, then it is going to return all the loans. Now, this is something that did not happen. This restructuring which the banks were mooting is something that failed, and as a result of which the financial stability report, it was very late for this report to bring out the problem of the NPA. So that is one issue of no transparency in this entire scenario. Another thing which is important here is with regards to a criteria of stressed assets. Now, here you need to understand that one is the NPAs, and this is something that is coming to light, but there is another asset which is known as the stressed asset. This is something that is not yet included in the NPA. This largely comprises of the loans which are dubious to be repaid. They are not clearly outwritten, but they are doubtful. So these assets are something that the banks are not talking about right now. So the issue is that maybe the NPA issue is not as it is being shown. This figure of 7.9 lakh crore is only exclusive to the NPAs, and it does not account for the stressed assets, and it might happen that the actual problem is much more beyond this. So there is another issue of transparency that can be highlighted here, that both in the stressed assets as well as the restructured loans is what the banking sector has been doing to cover up transparency and to give less accountability. So that is something that becomes important for us. However, another analysis which is warranted is with regards to some silver lining in this entire issue. There is some improvement. For example, it is being said by experts that the peak of the NPAs was in the year 2016. In September 2016, the NPAs have reached their peak, and now somehow they are being reduced. So that is one silver lining. Another thing is that the rating agencies have somehow shown some restraint. They have not downgraded the ratings of the public sector banks in India. It has shown some optimism. It is said that these banks will revive. So that is one silver lining. Another thing is that the centre has launched a mega recapitalization package of approximately 2 lakh crore to recapitalize the public sector banks. In the phase 1 lakh crore is what is going to be first added to the banks, infused into the banks, and later another 1 lakh crore. So this is another silver lining, that maybe the problem can be controlled. So this is something that is important for us. This is the entire analysis of the NPA issue. Now another issue which is impacting the banking sector in India, which is responsible for the crisis in the banking sector in India, is with regards to the banking businessman nexus. Now this again is something that is very important. This is largely in the context of the Punjab National Bank scam as well as the Rotovac fraud which has happened. In both these cases, what is emerging is that there was a nexus between the banking officials and the businessmen. The PNB scam is to the tune of 11,500 crore. The second scam is approximately to the tune of 4,000 crore. So you can imagine that what is the the magnitude of these scams. So this is something that becomes important for us. Now for the first issue that is important here is with regards to the failure of the internal mechanisms. In both these scams, what has happened is that there is a sense of failure of internal mechanisms within the banks, because it is the supervisory control which has been missed. The audits on both these in both these frauds is something that has failed. So that is one analysis here. In the case of Rotovac, the banking officials knew about this scam, but they have not reported it timely. And in the PNB scam, what has happened is that one single branch in Mumbai has led to this huge scam. So definitely there is a fault in the internal mechanism systems within the banks, and this cannot be denied. So that is the first analysis. Another issue is with regards to the failure of regulation. Now the regulation responsibility is on the Reserve Bank of India, and indeed the Reserve Bank of India has failed to ensure regulation to curb these scams. So this is one criticism which is coming against the RBI itself. Another regulation is what the government had to provide by the finance ministry. This too has not happened, so criticism is liable for the ministry itself. So that is something that becomes important here. Another thing which is important is with regards to the issue of letter of undertaking. Now we had discussed in the Punjab National Bank scam that the scam actually happened because of this problem of letter of undertaking. Now what you understand by the LOU, this is a type of a financial instrument. It is a bank guarantee that enables a bank's customer to take loans or to raise loans in foreign countries through India's foreign bank branches. So that is something that you understand by the LOU. But here what it becomes important for us is that what was the intention for this LOU? The intention was that if any person wants to import something that is produced within India, suppose a person wants to import some clothes which are made in India in a country like the UK, so the person there will require some money to make these imports. So to facilitate that this person can make these imports, what the government did is that the government allowed this person to take loans in the foreign country, in UK itself, and these loans can be taken place if a bank in India is going to give this letter of undertaking. So that was what was the intention behind it. But what happened in this case is that Mr. Nirav Modi's company took these loans, and he did not take these loans in foreign countries to import something for the trade. He did not take these loans, but rather he siphoned this money to some other companies. So that was another fraud which took place. So that is one analysis which has been given here. So another thing that you need to understand with regards to the letter of undertakings is that these LOUs are something that are exclusive to India, and it is not something that is allowed in any other country. So this again becomes important, that when it is not a global practice, then why in India it is being used and how it has led to such a huge scam. So that is one important analysis. Another thing which becomes important for us in the context of the PNB scam is the SWIFT system. Now the SWIFT system stands for the Society for Worldwide Interbank. So that is something that you need to understand. the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Transaction. That is the full form. So this is something that has been breached in the PNB scam, and this becomes important for us because this is a network through which all the banks are connected to each other, all the foreign banks are connected to each other, and the system has something that has been bypassed in the PNB scam. So this system again is something that becomes important for us. What is smacking in this entire controversy of the Rotovac scam as well as the PNB scam is not only the banking businessman nexus, but something also about the crony capitalism. There are chances that the government has had knowledge of this and it was something that was being hidden for long. So that is one analysis which comes out, and this is something that is responsible for the banking crisis in the country. So these are the two major issues. The third issue, as I had discussed, is with regards to the privatization of banks. Now first here, what becomes important is some history. Now what is important in the historical aspect is that we should know that when were these banks actually nationalized? It was in the year 1969, and you need to know that what was the reason for this nationalization is that approximately 35 banks every year during that point of time before 1969 were defaulting. So that was the reason because of which the government decided that to curb this tendency in the private sector banks, the government is going to nationalize them. So if the history itself was rooting from the problems of the private sector banks, so can today we justify that simply by privatizing these public sector banks the problem can be solved? So definitely that is not the solution here. Another thing is with regards to the people's trust. Now banking, I have discussed time and again, is an industry based on people's trust, and what has happened in all these cases is that the people's trust is something that is going to get eroded. Now the only issue here is that if still there is some degree of trust that the citizens are maintaining in the public sector banks, it is only because they are guaranteed by the government. So that is what is the primary source of the still existence of these public sector banks, which becomes important for us. So just to restore this trust, what is important is that the government continues to stand behind these banks and rather than privatize them, because that would be the final death knell of the banking sector. So that is one analysis. Another thing which becomes important in this regard is with regards to the 2008 financial crisis. Now this crisis was largely a banking crisis in the US as well as in Europe, and in both these countries what was seen was in both Europe, in all the European countries along with US, what was seen was that the banks that were involved were the private sector banks. So if the crisis could happen there because of the private sector banks, how can we say that the private sector banks cannot result in such a scenario in India? So that is one criticism against the privatization of banks. Another issue is with regards to the private banks themselves. Now, I had told you that definitely there is a case that the public sector banks have higher amount of NPAs, but it does not mean that the private sector banks have no NPAs. Not only that, another issue is that the companies in which have defaulted with regards to the NPAs are common to both the public as well as the private sector banks. So it cannot be said that the private sector banks have made any better choices than the public sector banks, and as a result of which this case for privatization of banks is something that is again defaulted upon, or for that matter it cannot be accepted. So that is something that becomes important in this regard. So this is something that is vital. Another thing is the final opinion or the way ahead in this matter. Now here definitely the problem of banking crisis is a real one. It is a festering one and it is a deeply impacting one, but what is required here is an adequate regulation. That means that the RBI has to take up a more proactive role and the government has to play a major role. It is only through this regulation that this problem can be curbed, and knee-jerk reactions like privatization of banks will not help in this issue. So that is something that is important. Another thing which is important is to increase the efficiency of the banks, increase transparency and accountability in these banks. So that will be the final solution in the way ahead here. So that is going to be important. Now I have time again mentioned this is the biggest challenge to India's economy, and this is a very, very important topic for 2018 mains. So that is the relevance. Coming to the next topic. Now again there are two articles on the editorial page. Both have the same context, which is with regards to the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's 8-day visit to India. So I am again going to club these two articles and discuss them collectively. So coming to the analysis. First and foremost, you need to know the issues which are important. Now the first issue that is important with regards to India-Canada relation that has now become important is the Khalistan issue. Now, you should know that in Canada, a huge diaspora is of the Indians, and amongst those also, it is the Sikhs who are dominant there. So that the sentiment of separatism and the idea of Khalistan is something that is still prevalent in Canada, and it is a political issue in Canada. So this is something that becomes important for us. In the recent visit of the Prime Minister Trudeau, some issues is what has emerged with regards to this. So that is something that we should know about. First and foremost, you need to know that in Canada, the Ontario provincial legislature had passed a particular resolution which had called the 1984 anti-Sikh riots in India as a genocide. So that was one irritant. Another thing which was important here is that the Punjab Chief Minister was denied a visit to Canada in the year 2016, and once again this was an irritant. Also, some Indian officials were not allowed to enter a Gurudwara in Canada. So this is also another irritant. The Prime Minister of Canada had visited a rally in Canada. He had visited an event in Canada which had hoisted the Khalistan flags. So this was again something not to the liking of India. Another very important development which has taken place is with regards to Mr. Jaspal Atwal. So this is something that you need to know. Now what is important here is that Mr. Jaspal Atwal, he is a Sikh separatist, and he has been convicted of attempting to murder an Indian minister in the year 1986. However, what happened is that this person was present in Justin Trudeau's entourage that had come to India. So the question was that why did the Canadian Prime Minister bring this person along? That was the first issue which caused embarrassment to Canada. The second cause of embarrassment was that he was allowed to enter India, and this was again a matter of great embarrassment to the government. This left both India as well as Canada red-faced, which was a headline in the Hindu. So this is something that becomes important with regards to the Khalistan issue. Now for India, its core interest is unity of India, and any such kind of activities in a foreign country India cannot welcome, and this is a concern which Canada should have towards India. It should have empathy towards India, and it should understand India's sensitivity of this issue. So that becomes important in the relation. Another thing which is important is with regards to the people-to-people connection. Now both India and Canada are connected because of India's diaspora, which constitutes approximately 3.6% of the population in Canada. 19 people of Indian origin are in the legislatures of Canada, so that becomes important again. Not only this diaspora is there in Canada, it is a powerful diaspora, it is an educated and a prosperous diaspora. So the people-to-people connection between India and Canada is something that is the bedrock of the relationship, which can take the relationship way too forward. So that is one analysis. Another thing which is important is with regards to the agreement to cooperate on terrorism and extremism. This has some agreement. This is an agreement which was recently agreed upon by the Indian Prime Minister as well as Canada's Prime Minister. This is of course something which is very close to India's heart. Canada has implicitly criticized Pakistan for conducting terrorism within India, so that is something that becomes important for us. That is one relevance here. Another issue which is important with regards to India and Canada is about the energy security. Another thing that you need to know in the energy security here is especially with regards to the nuclear energy. India is importing large amounts of uranium from Canada. Also, both Canada and India have signed a civil nuclear agreement. Recently, Canada even supported India's claim for joining the nuclear supplier group. So all of these issues are something that is important with regards to the nuclear energy. Another area of energy security is in the renewable energy. Canada has made huge strides in clean and renewable energy, and this is one sector where India is expanding. So Canada can be of great aid for India's expansion in this sector. So that is one importance here. Another thing is with regards to the freedom of sea lanes. Now freedom of sea lanes is of course close to both the countries. For Canada it is important because Canada has a major role to play in the Pacific Ocean, whereas for India it is important because of the Indian Ocean. Both the countries have reiterated their stand for freedom of sea lanes and also under the United Nations Convention on Laws of the Seas. Now what is important here is that recently we all know that China had denied to accept a verdict of the UNCLOS, and in this regard, if major countries like India and Canada are going to support this institution, then the importance of this institution is going to be maintained. So that is one important analysis. Another thing which is very, very important with regards to the India-Canada relation, which I would suggest you should not miss if a question is asked on this, is about the 5 E's. These are the 5 E's. The first is economy. Now here at present the trade between India and Canada is only $6 billion. So it is said that there is a huge scope for expansion, and indeed it should expand, especially because Canada is open for agreements on exchange of services, and this is something that is close to India. India has a power in services compared to the goods, so India can export its services to Canada. So in that regard, there is a huge scope for expansion of this trade. This is something that is important. With energy, we have discussed that both countries have cooperation with regards to nuclear as well as renewable energy. For education, what is important is the Canada, in a large number of Indian students are going to Canada for education, and Canada has some liberal immigration norms compared to US and UK. Both these countries are now having stricter norms for immigration, whereas Canada still maintains liberal norms. So this is something that is in India's interest. This is something that is important. Another thing that becomes important is with regards to entertainment industry. Now you should know that the Punjabi film industry is something that is very popular in Canada, and also the Bollywood films are something that are popular. So there is a huge scope for exchange on entertainment industry. So that is important. Another thing which has been raised is with regards to the empowerment of women. So that makes the 5 E's in the relationship. So this is something that is important. Another thing that is important is with regards to the technology and innovation. Now, the Canada has huge developments with regards to technology as well as innovation, and India has huge amounts to learn from Canada, especially in the smart city projects. Canada is known for its smart cities, and India could cooperate a lot with Canada for this endeavor. So that is something that becomes important. Another thing that becomes important is with regards to the India-Canada commonalities. Now, what are these commonalities? Is that both the countries have an inclusive system, they are multicultural, and they are democratic societies. So this becomes the bedrock again for the bilateral relations to develop more and more. So that is something that is important with regards to the India-Canada relation. So the final opinion here is that indeed there is a huge scope for expansion. Indeed there is huge potential, but provided that the core concerns of India are something that are addressed primarily with regards to sensitive issues like the Khalistan issue. So this is something that is important. India-Canada relation will become important this time. So that is the relevance. Now, based on today's discussions, please try and attempt these questions within a word limit of 150 words. So that's all for today's discussion. I thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you tomorrow.